So Larry, I think we're here today to talk about your books with l'artiere, specifically the polarities and maybe a little bit about the beats. I think that your books are so superbly edited and structured that I wanted to talk about that today. Aha, we get to see the real face. So I wanted to talk a little bit about your practices for putting together books. The priorities, for instance, and I hope people are familiar with them. If they're not, they'll go look at it, which you published in 2020 with l'artiere, has 4 sections with very different subject matter. It starts out with politics, then society, then country life, and then at home. And the images were all made between what, 2015 and 2020? 5-year period?
More or less, yeah.
More or less. So what led you to put those subjects together into a single book?
Well, I have to say, in all honesty, that a curator in Europe named Laura Serrani, I don't know if I pronounced that correctly, was the innovator of that construct. Most often these days, in the last 10 years or so, I've taken pretty much full control of my books, the beats and the Warhol book and so on and so forth. I've laid them out, and not quite art-directed them, but something like that, and so on. Whereas the polarities, definitely Laura had a very, very strong hand in. I would adjust a couple of images here and there. But as far as the quartet, so to speak, or the polarities, I think that the title, of course, it addresses itself to the idea of the totality of my life, which is to say that here I am, very political, out there on the picket lines or what have you, and then I come back and look at snowscapes, and and hide away from the world deeply so, and or photograph just bonfires or kittens or what have you,
So in terms of the polarities, then, is that a title that you came up with or she came up with?
She pretty much came up with it. The artiere guys are very smart. And do you know them?
No, well, I know their publications. I don't know them.
Yeah, their quality is really high end, and their family has a big printing press, a big house that they do enormously well doing commercial work and whatnot. The 2 brothers, especially Gianluca, have taken it upon themselves to make really, really high quality books, and with tremendous, not even, with no real commercial success in mind. It's only small editions, etc. At any rate, they are dedicated to a whole plethora, a democracy of expressions in terms of their books. It's not just documentary such as myself, but it's also poetic stuff. And also, I must say, they're a bit show-offy because they can really print.
Yeah,
Really.
they're beautiful reproductions. In a statement that about the book, you talk about each person having a magnet inside themselves that draws them to something, whether it is kittens or politics or whatever. With magnets, when you put 2 poles together, if you try to put 2 positive or 2 negative poles together, they repel each other. They push apart. But if you put opposites together, they attract. And I wondered if that was part of the setting up of these dualities or polarities between like politics and society versus home and country life. Do you feel that they're separate aspects of your life that push apart, or do you think that they attract each other?
I think they attract each other because one thing nourishes the other. I mean, if I was just out there in the political realm of things and running around at meetings and pickets and so on and so forth, I would be that person, and I would have virtually, I can't say that unilaterally, but I would have no subjective mode, no place for me to be quiet in, because when you get involved with politics on any level, maybe right, left, or center, doesn't make any difference. It's so completely consuming and so busy with artifact and systematic, necessities coming up in in a minutia on a daily level, you know, I just, so anything that you wanted to think about, like writing poetry or just simply looking at your finger for its beauty is, is out of the question, you know. I, that's why, you know, many of these political people should indeed drop acid for a little while, you know.
Some kind of transformational experience.
It will.
Yes, yeah.
The magnet factor is not something that I discovered, I say discussed with Laura, the curator of the books. That's something which have, I adore that as a concept in terms of the opposites, you know, the attraction and the repellent, but it's all about energy, you know. And I was talking to Judith Ross several months ago, you know, about the mystery of her pictures. And she's a funny gal. She's very, very smart and very intuitive, but she doesn't think in philosophical terms, you know. And I said, the thing about your pictures, Judith, is that you understand the nature of energy and how it flows or doesn't. You know, she said, energy, what's that? I said, that's
So,
it. Go
so
on.
how would you feel the energies in the different sections of your life are different? The politics and society images, for instance, that are in the polarities versus the country images, which are your fellow residents around Easton, PA, and then, you know, your actual home life where you take us into your home in this book. Are those different energies?
Absolutely different. I mean, when you go off into photographing for Vanity Fair or Hollywood parties, oh my God, people are so perked up and put on, you know, and they're working outside of their box, but the box, it's very tight because it's about a success and ambition and getting ahead and who's who and who are you with and so on and so forth. Whereas the folks back here are not interested in that. Maybe they are within a limited realm, but certainly they have no aspect of the possibility of that kind of ambition of being on the upper tiers of the power structure, you know. So often, more than likely, they can just be working and expressing with abandon, you know, and that's extremely attractive. But both of those types of energy are very intense energies, you know. The anxiety that comes from hyper ambition is really interesting, and the perhaps not anxiety, but the outward, maybe even hatred or love or something like that from the, so to speak, lower classes, you know, is vastly energized and interesting because they have nothing to lose, so they give everything to the moment, and that's how they gain, you know.
So how does your energy as an artist, as a recorder, respond to that? Does it change? Is it different?
It sure does. I mean, when I used to work for Vanity Fair, I dare not fart in public.
Not your behavior, but your energy and
Oh, I see.
way you think about the pictures. Does the way you approach taking those photos change in those different situations?
Not actually, no. I mean, basically, I'm being drawn into what magnetizes me and what stimulates the people in front of me, and I just basically jockey around in various ways to get whatever vantage point that I want to get. And it's not necessarily about close or far, even though it certainly entails that, but it's about infinitesimal little movements of form and how that's why probably my pictures are significant besides some light factors and stuff like that, is because of the classicism that's within them, and I really attend to it, you know. So I really look at the idea of heads and shoulders and hands and so on and so forth to see how one thing moves to the other. I'm interested in the sinew, you know, in the snake that constantly is, you know, roiling through, you know, public and private affairs, you know. How does the energy, and that is the energy, you know, and that's why the pictures, if they're successful, have energy because I'm so attentive to it.
And how does that differ when you're, I mean, in the 3 chapters that precede home, you're out in different people's environments, you're responding to things that you're seeing. In the last chapter of the book, which is home, you're responding to an environment that you know very well, that you've created, and that in a sense you have control over the elements there. Is that different? Is that a different kind of photography?
Well, photography is photography is photography, period.
Well, different kind of photographing.
Okay. But but it certainly is different. It's much more contemplative. It's very, very, if I'm looking at the book correctly, it's very, very signified by the way that light comes into the homestead or around, you know. It's all about the kind of quiet sensuality, you know, which pervades your existence if you allow it to be, to pervade, you know. And it's about, it's really interesting, the creative process, because sometimes I'll be dull and dead and to photographing. And I must say, I'm not an obsessive photographer. Even when I was working on a daily basis for making a living and stuff like that, I wasn't like Gary Winograd, you know, going out on the avenue every day just to need to know what photography does, et cetera, et cetera. I don't care about that. I care about it for him, it's fine. but not for me. My process is much to do with a kind of an incandescent revelation, and it doesn't come. It comes often enough to understand the nature of what my life is about, but it doesn't come like, wow, here I go, I'm going again. You know, there are times, and I have to be very, very candid. I've smoked a lot of pot in my life, and that certainly dulls you down, even though it stimulates a certain imagination in the first 30 minutes, and then you're a deadhead, you know? So I think probably that was done because I have too much of that ADD thing. What is that called? You know?
Oh, yeah, ADHD, yeah.
Yeah.
Attention deficit disorder.
Chill out a little bit, because otherwise I'd be like opening my mouth for everything, you know.
Well, but when you photograph in those social and political situations, you're sort of a silent observer, and yet, so I don't really, you know, when one talks to you, you're so lively and you're very forward with your opinions, and yet, you know, the role that you've taken on as a photographer in those kinds of situations is very different.
Absolutely different, and I must say that I live with an incredible amount of irony, internal irony, because indeed I am an energized character. You know, I do like to express myself, and I do have many opinions, not absolute ones, because I don't care to fight with anybody, but you know, so when I was working professionally or in the political spectrum and stuff like that, I had to keep mum. So, and I'm not an outsider photographer. I'm an insider photographer. I like to get in there and smell the sweat, you know, and even sweat a bit myself. And so I'm not chill. I don't go back here to make my photograph. I'm very, very physical, you know. And so, but indeed, in many more than I'd like to even think about instances, I lived with a clenched stomach. With I never got ulcers, but I should have had them years ago.
It's all that dope. It keeps you mellow.
Yeah, I think basically I'd get off the gig, you know, whoa, damn.
Well, you were talking about the sinewy snake that moves through the composition and the way there's a kind of classicism to the composition. And I think that carries over into the editing of your books. And if we think about either the polarities or even the beats, which is one of your earliest bodies of work, there's a kind of flow to the book. And how do you go about editing that book? What's your process, both conceptually and just physically, manually?
That was a great question, and I think that it's probably both, and it accords itself the physical factor is extremely important and probably overpowers everything else. However, not unlike shooting the picture in the political sphere or any place for that matter, you get an idea, a comprehensive idea of what actually you're seeing out there in the world. And unless you're driven by some kind of terrible, restrictions from an assignment or something like that, you then want to be responsible to record, or at least feel what it means to be here and there and everywhere in terms of the vagaries of various things that are happening in the room or in the arena, And then once you place yourself at that, because I am sociological by training, if you will, since I was brought up to be a communist and with political overtones and so on and so forth, and communism, well, people can't do that. but, but people are very, very flawed, as am I, as are you. We all are, we try our best to do our best, but what comes out is another story entirely. But so you look at the whole scenario, the opera, if you will, and then you move into that part of it and this part of it, and then once you're in the throes of where it is that you want to be, then you work absolutely physically. What kind of expression, what kind of empathy, what kind of anxiety, what kind of elation, what kind of this and that, and I respond instantaneously to each one of these emotional elements, so that I can make a picture with whatever structures, et cetera, that I have, that means something about the matters at hand,
So when you go to translate a bunch of pictures that you've shot into a book, do you start then with a conception knowing what you're looking for and then go look through the pictures for it? Or do you look at the pictures and see what comes out of that?
No, it's a wild process. It's no process at all, almost. It's like I'll take all the pictures, which I'll have edited over how long it took to make the pictures or what have you, and stick them on the big editing table, the big table in the studio room, and just put them there. And I'll have Jamie, my assistant, or others, but now Jamie, the best assistant of all, make little tiny ones, 4x5, 5x7, so I can put them all around in the hundreds, and then I'll put them around just with happenstance, and then a moment in time I'll move this that way and that this way and that way, and then there'll be kind of a sociological gist to it, and then no, this kind of picture has an inferential relationship to the next picture, so there's a physical relationship, and so on and so forth. But I'll do it, and then I'll leave the table alone for a week in chaos, not think about it at all, not a moment. And then when I get back to the table, I do the job.
And so how do you do the job? How do you decide what the flow should be? I mean, it certainly seems both in the beats and in the polarities, which you say Laura had a much greater hand in, that there definitely is a sense of chapters, a sense of a movement through. How do you set up that flow? How do you decide what it's going to be?
For me, inferential physicality, I suspect. In other words, one picture influences the next picture. Some pictures need to be singular on a page with space around it because of the impact that they have, and they shouldn't necessarily be tainted by another group of energies. Some want to be, the book, that's interesting book, which is the Andy Warhol book, Fink on Warhol, which I did with Damiani, and they wanted to do. We found a group of pictures of Warhol. I didn't like Warhol very much at all, and I never hung out with those guys, never. But there was 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 days that I did a fashion shoot in the Lower East Side and so on for an operation called the East Side Review, a literary magazine. So they put me to that task, and I ran around with Gerard Malanga and Andy and Ingrid and Edie and God knows who, all these white nihilists, you know, and and made some, you know, okay pictures. They're not great pictures, but they're good pictures. I'm a good photographer. Okay, they wanted to put the book together like that's the book, because Andy is the, you know, everybody's breathing hard on Andy these days and yesteryear and so on and so forth. I said, no fucking way. There has to be context, because Andy lived inside times which were revolutionary times. He was not the revolution. He, in fact, was the retardé, you know. The revolution was from black people, was from women, from all kinds of things like that. The revolution was the angst and the anxiety in the New York streets. So I went way back into the file, you know, and brought stuff back this way and that way and that way, so as to give them some context, and then some poetic pictures of buses and, you know, stuff about New York, about how it feels to be in the city, you know. And in the midst of all of that are all these fancy goofuses, you know, running around doing their stuff, you know. And that was my intelligence, you know, moving specifically to to contextualize Andy, to de-emphasize him, and to emphasize the fact that life is much broader than stardom, you know. And so, yes, I have, and then how the pictures were laid out to the next level is a very, very physical thing, and I can't even talk about that without the book in front of me, and that's for us to have coffee on another day.
Now, in the Beats, it's a very interesting, that's your first body of work you did when you were 18 years old or so.
17.
And there's kind of a star there, Nick, who kind of is the central figure. Sorry?
His name is Turk.
Kurt. Okay.
Turk, yeah.
Turk. Oh, Turk, right. Turk, yes. And so, and it's interesting because I wanted to talk a little bit about the role of the word and the way it plays in the two books. In the Beats, there's the essays and the poems, and then there's the manuscript for the essay, which is interjected. So you get the handwriting of the author of the essay. And so that kind of breaks it up. And whereas in the polarities, there's no writing at all. And you also don't give time and place captions for the images. And I was wondering why that is.
Well, time and place is exactly where you are in the photograph. That's that. I don't want to historically annotate it towards some kind of scholarly essence, you know. I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in the imperative that the picture brings to you, you know, the experience, period. As far as the stuff that you're talking about in the Beats, Jerry Stern, who guess was 96 the other day, he's living in Florida, is a great guy, you know, and he wrote the thing under protest because it was fenced, you know, but nevertheless he did it, you know, and he wrote it on little scraps of paper at the table, you know. That was his essay, you know. And I looked at those scraps of paper and I said, Jerry, would you mind if I took those home? He said, I'd crumble them up. I'm going to throw them out. I said, good, let me have them. And I decided that would be the rhythmic breakup, you know, the authenticity, even though it would have been quote unquote better had it been scraps of paper from some beat poets or something like that.
Right.
But I didn't have access to that, and I wasn't going to go into copyright infringement or anything like that. So Jerry was the man. And also Robert Cordier, who's living in Paris, he was the guy who was on the trip with us, wrote that little small essay, you know, about how many people he knew in his life, and there were many. He's a nice guy, but he was really a, you know, extravagant character. So I put those all together like that, so as to give it rhythm and authenticity, and that was very much my doing. and I pretty much art directed that book. You know, you have the Powerhouse edition of it,
Yes.
because there's another edition that Artiere, the publisher themselves, did, the European edition, which is more beautiful than the Powerhouse one. And what they did is they shifted papers. So the writing in the text carries little things like that on beautiful
Ah,
small paper.
beautiful.
Oh, it is one piece of work, you know. So, and then also in that one, there's an afterlog of a thing written by me about being on the road with them with my own poetic style, which wasn't in the Powerhouse book because it was so on and so forth. I wrote that little afterword in Italy, you know, in the plant while we were on press, you
Wow, great.
know. So I do. I mean, I love books. I mean, I actually photographic exhibitions are terrific, but books are forever.
Yep. Yes, and they last, and people can experience the moment. You talk about the photograph being the here and now and not wanting to label it with that because you're actually in it when you look at it. Well, books allow you to have that and allow future generations to have that experience, whereas exhibitions are ephemeral.
Yeah.
What you
Well,
put together, what you shape as the reality, as the artist, or I shape as the curator, what I shape goes away, but the book that gets shaped, that stays together.
yeah. Yeah. No, that's
So let's talk about the future a little bit as we sort of wrap up. What kind of book projects are you working on now and for the future?
well, you know, it's interesting. I have a relationship with CCP in
Center for
Arizona.
Creative Photography.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and they took away 3 or 4 thousand prints for the archive. And there was, you know, some wealthy people in the Midwest who wanted to do something like that, and so they made Martha and I, you know, very friendly towards money.
Good to be friendly with money.
And at any rate, part of the deal was that all of the negatives had to go down to CCP at some point. And so what I've been doing, and I thought 3 months, well, anyhow, I was completely delusional because I've been working on it now for nearby a year and just looking at all of the negatives and all of the contact sheets and choosing and then not scanning, but actually photographing the negative itself with a high-end camera and then putting it onto the computer so that I have all of my choices. And this is very interesting because I made choices previous before. I've always been a reasonably intelligent editor of my own work, but the pictures are not my babies. They're pictures.
Mm.
Some people say, "Oh, it's my." It's not the case. It's, you know, I got a lot of babies. Let's put it that way,
Yeah.
and I'm not promiscuous. So, but uh, but nevertheless, so I'm choosing these things and so on, and then in doing so, I'm also finding pictures here and there and everywhere, which are ones I didn't choose previous before for any number of reasons, which are pretty interesting. So there might be something coming out of that, you know. There's also earlier work, which another book could be persuaded to be from the New York Times and so on and so forth. So just street stuff. Um, there's stuff in Europe, European trips when I was traveling here and there and everywhere, not all over the world, that I haven't been that ambitious. And there's a lot of beautiful work from, let's say now, just recently, I just looked at these negatives from Portugal. Teresa Cisa, a curator and a organizer in Portugal, had me come over and photograph um, fishermen out there in the high seas with hunting for sardines, and also the picking of the grapes for the port wine.
Mm.
Very beautiful, classic pictures. These I want to make a book out of, you know. And then there's also not in the works quite yet because it's so confusing, a retrospective book. And who's going to publish it, we don't know. Hopefully, with Benny Tashin as my gallerist now, it might go over to his pop, to Tashin Books, which wouldn't be such a bad thing.
Well, you're going to need a really big book, and they do really big, thick books.
Oh yeah, Tashin is big. I don't want to do one of those things because you have to have an elephant caravan to carry them around. But
Sherpas, you need Sherpas.
really, but but it's not at all contracted at all. So but whomever. But it's been really daunting. I've been thinking about the retrospective project for a while now, and I've done so much work, and there's so many variables, like in the polarities and so on like that. It's very, very hard to assimilate some kind of order, not order, but organization in terms of it's really not my work, it's my life, because I photograph my life, period, and so how do you do that? It's not going to be the oldies but the goldies, because that's kind of boring. We've seen that before. It has to be something which is interspersed. So that's a project which is not on the table, but very much, hovering above the table, waiting for itself to come into some kind of formation.
Wow, that's an ambitious project. And what are you shooting now in the time of pandemic and quarantine? What have you been shooting?
Barbara, man, I won't go close to a human being. I mean, it's just, they're all dangerous, I go to the market with a mask on and a plastic shield and a this and that, and I'm not paranoid particularly, but I mean, why bother with danger? I've
Yeah.
I've always been careful, even in my journalistic events and stuff like that. I was in riots and wars and stuff like that. I didn't like them. I didn't like them at all. I wasn't obsessed to do that. I don't like to be shot at. I have been shot at. It's really not cool. So every shard of the virus is basically a bullet at you, coming through the air, and it's not cool. So I've been laid back on that, and I've been photographing around the house, around the fields, and getting fascinated with small things. When you in the sink, you take a spoon and you put it underneath the faucet, and the water goes like that. Sort of like, if you think of it, Bernice Abbott's experiment with the the early stuff of the scientific stuff,
Mm-hmm.
So I've been doing that somewhat, and then especially in the morning light coming across, so it shatters into beautiful minuets of shape and form and light, So I'm happily satisfying myself with photographing almost nothing.
Well, that's wonderful. I think we've pretty much filled up our time, and so any last words?
Yeah, wait a second, let me see that. Oklahoma, I don't know where that is. Yeah, no, it's been a terrific conversation. By the way, Martha, sends love to you and so on and so forth.
Same
And that's
back.
another thing should be said. Gianluca just suggested that Martha and I do a small book together with some of my poems, because you probably know, or maybe you don't know, I write poems every day. I mean,
I follow your Instagram account. Occasionally we get one.
yeah, and then also Facebook. I work on Facebook more often than Instagram. And
Yeah, I do that too. Yeah, I follow that too. Yeah.
yeah, so I don't believe I'll ever be a great writer, but I am a writer because I like to express myself, and I'm friendly that way.
That'd be a great project for the two of you, to see the two of you
Yeah,
complimenting each other. That'd be wonderful.
yeah, no, it's a love affair made in heaven, not originally, but after years.
That itself could be a topic for a book.
Yeah, right.
Great. Well, thank you so much. It's been great to see and visit with you.
Thanks for your generosity, honey. That's really, really cool.